This lecture is on overdentures. Today, overdentures are done more prominently on implants and not on tooth roots or teeth, but the options discussed today give you some information on the use of natural teeth and tooth roots. This is just another option in your bag of treatment plans.
A prosthesis that it covers or is partially supported by natural teeth, tooth roots, or dental implants is called an overdenture. The overdenture can be used when you have a loss of vertical dimension case, unusual occlusion, or for extreme wear cases. The patient that's pictured actually wore an overdenture over her natural teeth to improve her mastication, but she also was a speech therapist and was afraid that by getting her teeth extracted and having a conventional denture, her patients who do lip reading would have problems doing so with a denture. So she wanted to make sure she kept her teeth, so she takes her denture out when she's doing her speech therapy classes. In a case like this pictured, the first thing that you must do if you are going to restore a patient's lost vertical dimension is to test to see if the patient can actually tolerate this increase in vertical dimension of occlusion. Will the patient be able to handle it from a muscular standpoint? Because oftentimes vertical dimension is really not lost. Teeth extrude to maintain the vertical dimension. You do this with a bite guard, opening the patient to the desired increased vertical dimension. And you let that patient wear it for several weeks and see whether he can tolerate proceeding with the overdenture construction. After successfully testing with your bite guard, you can then go through the steps of construction of the overdenture. Be sure you try the denture setup in before you process it. Check for interferences with speech and for the proper vertical dimension of occlusion. When you have this many natural teeth remaining, you may have difficulty seating your denture. This is because of the path of draw of the denture. It's complicated by the presence of the remaining teeth. Also, the denture may not be able to press up into the tissues because the teeth are holding up the denture and you don't get as good of suction. So therefore, the area above each tooth indentation may need to be slightly relieved so that the denture can press up into the tissues in order to get good retention. This was a case where the patient had an overdenture before, but she wore the teeth down severely. So I took denture teeth that were the anatoline mold and ground away the facial surfaces of the teeth. I placed some nail polish on the surface and sprinkled some acrylic beads on the polish to create a mechanism for retention of composite on the facial later. And then I cast the teeth in a non-precious metal. The composite was added to create the denture tooth. After the try-in, the denture was processed and delivered to the patient. The patient wore this denture for eating and really at most times. She took it out only when she taught her speech classes so that the patients could see how she used her natural teeth to make certain phonetic sounds. I did not see this patient on a regular basis, but the next time I saw her was 8 years later, and she was still wearing the denture. In this picture, you see an arch that's been prepared for an overdenture using 2 endodontically treated teeth that remained in the arch. The tooth roots remain, and they have been cut off just about a couple of millimeters above the ridge. And then you can place amalgam in the area of the root canal. A better way to protect the teeth would be to prepare gold copings like a cast post with a coping on top that covers the tooth surface and goes just below the gingival margin for protection. The previous example that you saw were 2 roots retained as support for a complete denture. Those roots do not provide very much retention for that lower denture. In this example, an attachment can be placed into the roots and cemented. This is a simple and inexpensive attachment called the uni-anchor attachment. The picture above shows the attachment that's just been cemented into the tooth roots. The lower picture shows the female part that's been placed on the attachment, and it will be secured into the denture with acrylic resin. To the lower right are 3 examples of stud attachments from a company called Attachments International. They have a 330-page catalog available that you can buy, or a great online catalog. Go to their website sometime and see some of the things that are available for you for overdentures. You can see that the uni-anchor attachment, the female part, has been captured in the denture. The attachment can be adjusted as the denture loosens by crimping these little small fingers with a special tool that's available from the company. This is an attachment that has a metal ball and a metal female part. The problem with this type of attachment is that the metal against metal causes wear, and eventually that ball that is in the tooth will lose its curvature and lose its retentive mechanism. It's not easily replaced when the attachment is cemented into a tooth root. Oftentimes that's the end of the use of that attachment. The last part of the definition involves implants for support of the overdenture. The simplest is the 2-implant supported overdenture. The most common application of this overdenture is when restoring a patient with a complete denture and placing the 2 implants on the mandibular arch. This has become the American Dental Association's standard of care for complete denture treatment plan. The one on the left is an O-ring supported overdenture, which provides less torque to the implants than the one shown on the right, the locator attachment. The choice should depend on the condition of the abutments, the length of the implants or teeth, and the periodontal status of the implants or teeth. This is an example of the more complex and expensive implant restoration, the bar-retained complete denture. It provides more stability, retention, and support for the complete denture. With this restoration, the denture is more implant-supported as compared to tissue-supported, seen with only 2 implants. The picture shows the abutments placed on the implants prior to screwing on the bar part of the prosthesis. The bar creates a prosthesis that is more like an implant-supported prosthesis rather than a tissue-supported denture. The above case shows a 4-implant bar with 3 hater clips and 2 loo attachments. The loo attachment is like a little small rod that goes through the hole of the bar and attaches the denture. The lower shows a 3-implant retained bar with hater clips and 2 ERA attachments. The ERA attachment is similar to your locator attachment. Here's a picture of the tissue sides of the dentures in these 2 cases. The upper shows a hater clip for the bar and 2 latches that are used for the loo system. The lower shows ERA attachments and hater clips used to retain the complete overdenture. This is one of the final prostheses as shown in the picture. It looks like an ordinary complete denture, but is much more satisfactory in function. This happens to be the patient with that 3-implant retained bar.
An overdenture is a prosthesis that can be supported by which of the following: 1, tooth roots; 2, implants; 3, natural teeth. Your answers: A, 1 and 2, B, 2 and 3, C, 1 and 3, 4, 1, 2, and 3.
The reason we consider the overdenture versus removing the teeth is that it is a more conservative management approach to the remaining dentition. Teeth may not remain in an arch if they are not suitable as retentive abutments. They may not be suited for aesthetic reasons, or they may be compromised beyond repair, but they may lend themselves as valuable support for the complete overdenture. Here's an unusual occlusion problem on a patient with Down syndrome. We tried the conservative approach by making an overdenture on this patient, not knowing how she would be able to handle a complete denture. We attempted to restore her vertical dimension, opening the pin on the articulator. The denture setup is difficult on this type of a case, and the teeth may need to be reduced considerably to fit into the setup and to have a path of draw. The following is a list of advantages for the overdenture. First of all, maintenance of bone. It will retain bone. The denture stability and retention are enhanced. The patient's perception is good. There's a relatively simple technique involved, but it can be difficult at a number of teeth that are retained. Definitely a psychological advantage because the patient, oftentimes losing those last 2 teeth can be psychologically damaging for the patient. Aesthetics is usually an advantage in that you get good results there. It's a reversible type of treatment. You can always go back to something else, maybe even crown and bridge if you need to. And it is a sensible transition to the complete denture. This movie shows the natural resorption of the mandible after the teeth have been removed. The overdenture has an effect on the amount of this resorption. A Carlsson and Persson study on resorption shows that after extractions, the average bone loss in 1 year is about 4 millimeters. Bone loss continues for many years, as evidenced in this study. This illustrates a study of the bone resorption for 8 different cases over a period of 5 years. It measured the amount of resorption with cephalometric tracings. Compare the amount of bone loss in 8 different cases where overdenture canine abutments were retained for a 5-year period to the ridge resorption where conventional extractions for a complete denture was done. You can see that the resorption is minimal in the overdenture cases. In this particular study, bone loss with the full denture amounted to 5.2 millimeters over a 5-year period. The overdenture with retained canines showed only 0.6 millimeters of resorption over the 5-year period. Here's another study showing that the bone loss is less significant with the overdenture restoration as compared to the conventional complete denture. This sort of shows the variance of results that you can get from different studies. Perhaps this is a result of the amount of alveoloplasty done after the initial surgery. It's hard to say. The overdenture abutment maintains stability of the denture also. If you add an attachment mechanism to the complex, you add retention to the denture restoration. An attachment wax pattern was added to the coping wax pattern and cast. The most common problem you run into when doing this, though, is whether or not you have enough room between the arches for the attachment. If you do not have sufficient room, you end up with 2 great big old lumps of acrylic lingual to your denture teeth. By maintaining the root with the periodontal ligament around it, the patient gains proprioception. This tells the patient where the denture teeth are located and increases masticatory efficiency. The overdenture is a simple alternative to the complete denture. 2 canines with extreme crown-to-root ratios, meaning greater than 50%, are not good RPD abutments, but they will make good overdenture abutments if you maintain at least 6 millimeters of tooth root in the bone. After cutting the teeth down to about 2 to 3 millimeters above the tissue and rounding the corners, you end up with a better crown-to-root ratio and a good stabilizing component for the complete overdenture. Obviously, root canal therapy was necessary to use them as reliable abutment.
Which of the following is not an advantage of the complete overdenture? A. Maintenance of the residual ridge. B. Denture stability. C. Reversibility of treatment. D. Increased maintenance. E. Aesthetics.
There are also some disadvantages for the overdenture. First of all, lack of oral hygiene. Patient must maintain good oral hygiene. There's a susceptibility to dental caries, especially if the teeth are not protected with a coping. Susceptibility to periodontal disease. There's a higher cost due to the endodontics and restorative factors. There's an increased maintenance, and there's additional treatment time for the patient and the dentist. And it is more exacting for the dentist. Oral hygiene is definitely a disadvantage to the overdenture. Plaque is retained easily around the overdenture abutments and often goes unnoticed by the patient. One of the contraindications of construction of an overdenture is if the patient has existing oral hygiene problems. Patient indications or considerations for treatment planning and overdenture are the following. Patients with a few healthy remaining teeth, but they may be periodontally involved, coronally intact, or morphologically compromised, may be indications for overdenture abutments. Patients who have mutilated or severely compromised dentition from either trauma, abrasion, or bruxism are good indications for overdenture abutments. And lastly, when you have these indications, the cases need to be mounted to be able to determine the inner ridge distance to see whether overdenture abutments can be utilized. There are contraindications for treatment planning in overdenture. They are patients with very poor oral hygiene, periodontally compromised teeth, teeth not suitable for root canal therapy, insufficient space between the alveolar ridges, soft tissue or bony defects that cannot be surgically corrected around the abutment teeth, an example being large undercuts, and financial. A common contraindication is the presence of large bony undercuts labial to the abutment teeth. Think about how the denture would have to stand out away from the tissues in order to seat the denture. Also, in this example, the attachment has one path of draw, and the denture would have a quite different path of draw to get around the undercuts labial to the abutment teeth. In selecting abutment teeth, there are some considerations you need to make. One, the anterior ridge is extremely vulnerable, therefore the canines and the bicuspids are your best choice. 2, it's recommended that you have at least one tooth per quadrant. 3, teeth should not be next to one another as this inhibits oral hygiene. 4, a canine or a bicuspid coupled with a second molar is an ideal choice. 5, you should aim to create a tripod or a rectangular arrangement with teeth. And 6, consider the forces from the opposing arch in the selection of abutment teeth. The anterior ridge is extremely vulnerable, therefore the canines and premolars are your best choices for the abutments. Sometimes people will retain a central incisor because endodontic therapy has already been done in that tooth. The maxillary ridge is vulnerable because the mandibular anterior teeth are usually the last ones to remain in the lower arch and will beat the ridge to death and turn it into flabby tissue. This abutment selection for this arch looks a little bit questionable because of possible extreme undercuts labial to these selected teeth. The ideal arrangement for overdenture abutments is a rectangular design for stability. You can also create a tripod effect. The upper left is a rectangular arrangement using O-rings as the abutment attachments. The lower right is a rectangular arrangement using ERA attachments. When selecting teeth, you do not want to select teeth that are right next to one another. Basically, it's not good for tissue health. You would like one tooth per quadrant, but if you select more than one, say 2, they should be spaced so that they're not next to one another. The canine or first bicuspid and a second molar are ideal when trying to select teeth for a rectangular arrangement. You could also pick a tripod arrangement like a central incisor and 2 second premolars or first molars. Having 4 abutments allows us to have a horseshoe-shaped complete denture without a palate, which patients like very much. The zest attachment may be used when you have a space problem between the arches. It goes into the tooth rather than taking up space above the tooth. The problem with this is often the path of draw. Undercuts requiring any rotation of the denture to seat it is considered a contraindication to use of the zest attachment. Also, the patient cannot be careless when inserting the denture or the attachment will break. There are also some periodontal considerations when selecting abutment teeth for overdentures. The pocket depth around an abutment tooth cannot be greater than 3 millimeters. There should also be a minimum of 6 millimeters of root in bone. Significant bone loss and a mobility of 2 or 3 precludes the tooth from selection as an abutment. Also, a minimum of 1 millimeter of attached gingiva should exists in order to select this tooth as an abutment. And posterior molars should have cleansable furcations if they are to be used as an abutment. Radiographs can give information on bone levels, and a minimum of 6 millimeters of bone must be present on the root of the abutment tooth, and also it must have no greater mobility than a 1. The teeth shown on the slide have a lot of attached gingiva, but a tooth selected as an abutment must have a minimum of 1 millimeter of attached gingiva to be selected as an abutment for an overdenture. Poor oral hygiene is a major factor in the loss of abutment teeth. It is extremely important to instruct the patient on plaque control. He must know what will happen if he is not compliant with proper care. The use of chlorhexidine digluconate, Peridex for one, should be placed on the regimen of care. Fluoride toothpaste and an application of gel cam in the area should be done on a daily basis. Dietary counseling is also very important, and the patient should be set up on a regular schedule of recall visits. There are some endodontic considerations that need to be factored into the selection of abutment teeth. Anterior single-rooted teeth are easier and cheaper to use for the patient. Endodontics may be avoided if the canals are calcified, but a high number of these develop abscesses later on down the road. Contraindications to the selection of endodontically treated teeth include A. Vertical root fracture, B. Mechanical perforation, C. Internal resorption, D. Broken instrument in the canal, E. Horizontal fracture of the tooth below the crest of bone. To shape the abutment, you reduce the tooth down to about 2 to 3 millimeters above the gingiva. It follows the contour of the ridge. Then all the sharp line angles are rounded off to eliminate those 90-degree angles. It should not be reduced down to the level of the gingiva. In selection of the abutment restoration, an alloy or a composite in the canal opening can provide years of additional service for the tooth root. Occasionally a gold coping is necessary, with or without a post or retentive pins. It depends on the condition of the tooth and the amount of tooth above the gingival attachment. The coping does not necessarily prevent caries. Here is a 3-piece cast post coping created from a wax pattern. It includes the Dalabona attachment added to the coping. The retentive component will be secured into the denture with acrylic resin. An attachment mechanism is often cast with the copings. The picture on the upper left shows a hater bar constructed between 2 copings on canines. The lower left picture also shows an attachment cast with coping. This one would require considerable space between the arches to use successfully.
Placing a coping on an abutment tooth prevents a chance of caries on that abutment tooth.
You must consider the space available between the 2 arches when you want to choose an attachment. The case needs to be mounted for this. With implants, we often work up the denture to the point of wax try-in, and then with the use of a surgical stent created from that try-in and a CT scan, we can determine the space available and the amount of ridge reduction that is needed to successfully complete the case. Various attachments are available that require different amounts of interridge distance. Also, there are several measuring devices that can be used to measure the interridge distance. This chart shows the various attachments and the height that each one requires to restore an abutment. Another consideration of space measurement that must be added is that of the acrylic resin on top of each of these attachments. It must be a minimum of 2 to 3 millimeters in order to give enough strength to the prosthesis and prevent fracture above the attachment. This again shows the zest attachment, which requires the least amount of room to restore an abutment. It is considered when there's not enough inter-ridge distance for the other attachments. It is important to do careful diagnosis and treatment planning in advance. This is not one of the best attachments to be used, and it can sometimes be prevented by planning for reduction of bone when implants are being placed, or for crown lengthening if pre-planning is done in advance. If you have more than one abutment, there needs to be parallelism between the abutments. Also, you must not have any labial undercuts or they may interfere with the path of insertion. If you have non-parallelism between your attachments, then some of those attachments will wear faster than others and have to be replaced more regularly. The primary reasons that abutment teeth are lost are for the following reasons. 70% of them are periodontal problems. 25% is recurrent caries on the abutment tooth. 5% is from some type of complication with the endodontic procedure. There are also causes of gingival irritation that we need to consider. And what may cause that is 1, movement of the denture base, poor oral hygiene, and then if there is excessive space around the abutment. For home maintenance, use stannous fluoride, for example Gelcam, in the denture for a minimum of 10 minutes daily. Often the patient will put a drop in the overdenture in the area of the abutments at the beginning of the day and let it bathe the tooth for a 10-minute period of time. If the patient wears the dentures overnight, which is not recommended, then the best time to place the fluoride in the denture abutment areas is prior to bedtime after brushing the tooth roots and dentures. Fluoride dentifrices with 5,000 parts per million is also recommended.
You have a patient with 3, 5, 6, 11, 13, and 15 remaining. All the teeth have severe wear, but not down to the gingiva. They are all possible abutments for an overdenture. The patient has plenty of money. What teeth would you have to choose for abutments for a palateless complete denture?
Here is an overview of the attachments that we have talked about.
In selection of an abutment tooth, there is a 3 millimeters of attached gingiva on the tooth. Can this tooth be chosen for an abutment tooth for an overdenture?
Here are the steps for using one of the popular attachment kits. I have some of these kits on hand for your use. Consider the space between the ridges when selecting the proper kit. With some of the kits, a small transparent grid is available to overlay your radiograph. This can be used to select the size and the length of the attachment post, which comes in different sizes in the kits. This particular kit is called a flexi post. You will then select the burrs that are appropriate to use with the size of the post that you have selected. This is very similar to using the reamers that correspond to the post systems that you have probably used when restoring a tooth that has had a root canal therapy. You will then measure the post length. Determine how far down the root you wish to drill for the placement of the post. Place a rubber stop on the drilling burr and open up the canal with the burr. Some systems have more than one drill that must be used to create the post space. If so, follow the order of preparation outlined in the specific directions for the type of kit you are using. The posts are checked for fit, and then they are cemented into the canals with the appropriate cement requested by your instructor. Before seating the attachments, The patient should be free of lesions caused by the new denture. The next step is to relieve the denture in the area of the attachments until it is fully seated over the teeth with the attachment in place over the post. Some attachments have a spacer that must be placed prior to placing the retentive component. Check to see if a spacer is included with your attachment system. If so, place it on the post first. Then place the retentive component of the attachment on the post and hollow out the denture more until the denture seats completely over the attachment and is seated onto the tissues. Studies show that the most accurate method of seating of an attachment is to go completely through the denture and to cure from the opening in the denture. Others feel that a vent hole is adequate to allow excess material to escape when seating the denture into the proper position. Also, block out any tissue undercuts or tooth undercuts so that you do not lock the denture into place. You should not block out the retentive area of the attachment itself to the denture. Try in the dentures again to see that you have adequate clearance above the attachment and to make sure that the denture is seated completely. As I said before, the best way to ensure that you get the denture all the way down is to place a hole all the way through the denture if you're having problems getting it seated onto the tissues. In this case, you had to have a hole through the top of the denture to allow your denture to completely seat. This also gave you good access to the area into which you are going to work. Note in this case again that the attachment is sticking out above the top of the denture. Maybe we didn't have very good planning in this case. Using one dappen dish for liquid and one for powder, add material by dipping the brush first into the liquid and then into the powder in the same manner as you did when you were building your cast post pattern in your preclinical course. Overbuild the cover to the attachment so that you allow for shrinkage of the material and for polishing of the material when it is set. You also want to have 2 to 3 millimeters of acrylic covering that attachment. This slide shows the FlexiPost female captured in the complete denture with the acrylic resin. Remove the excess acrylic resin, taking care not to thin the acrylic resin below 2 to 3 millimeters of thickness over the attachment area. Use an acrylic resin burr and finish the surface to a very smooth surface. Then you can go to pumice and acryluster, finishing the surface to a very shiny finish. You're now ready to insert the denture into the patient's mouth. Be sure to check for complete seating and check the occlusion. After completing this, give oral hygiene instructions to the patient and make certain that he or she can insert and remove the prosthesis themselves. This is the finished case with the overdenture attachments captured in the mandibular complete denture. Patients love having the security provided by the overdenture with an attachment added to it. Thank you for listening to a lecture on overdentures. Hopefully you have learned some valuable information about a treatment option for enhancing function associated with complete dentures.